5 years ago, the sanctuary of St. Peter and Paul Cathedral in Providence was filled as the new bishop for the diocese, Thomas J. Tobin, was installed. Ordained as a priest in the early 1970s, Father Tobin eventually became Bishop of Youngstown, Ohio. In 2005, he was picked to head the diocese in this most Catholic state in the Union. A native of western Pennsylvania and an inveterate Steelers fan. More on that in just a moment. Of course, he is charged ahead with the force of an offensive lineman in his stewardship of the diocese. Bishop Thomas Tobin joins us now this morning for this edition of ABC6 News on the Record. Thank you very much for joining us.
Andrew, good morning. Nice to be with you again.
Good, and congratulations.
Thank you.
5 years.
5 years. Well, it's a very modest milestone, but it's an opportunity to reflect a little bit and thank God, first of all, for all the blessings and graces of these 5 years, and also to thank everybody in the state, everyone in the diocese has been so welcoming and kind and cooperative. So it's a modest milestone, but a chance to think a little bit about what we've done and where we're going.
Well, let's take a look at past what you have done. Is it what you expected?
Well, I suppose I didn't come in with any real clear expectations. The first process, of course, was to learn, to get around the state, get around the diocese, visit all of our parishes and schools, and get to know our priests and the leaders in the diocese and leaders in the community. So I didn't have real clear expectations, but it's been a great learning process for me, and I'm very pleased that the response has been so positive, and I think we've done some good things.
You know, one of the projects that the diocese has been involved in over the past few years deals with the financial challenges that many of us are facing right now, especially when it comes to home heating oil. You have done all you could to step up and try and offer support for those in the community who really need as much help as possible when we're dealing with the home heating oil costs. How has that project been going? And I would imagine that we are going to continue to see what the assistance from the diocese for those who need this help.
Sure. That's a program that's been very successful, and we're very both proud of it and very grateful for everyone who has supported the Keep the Heat On program. In the first 5 years, we've raised over $1 million and been able to assist over 3,500 households throughout the state as an opportunity of last resort for those who have nowhere else to turn to provide some heating assistance for themselves and their families in the midst of some very cold winters. So the community has been very generous in supporting that program. We're very grateful. And what I like about that program in particular, it's very tangible. There are people being kept warm throughout the state because of the results of the Keep the Heat On program. So we certainly expect to launch that again come the fall, and we hope people will be generous again.
Now, that's just a small manifestation of one of the larger challenges that we're all facing in these tight economic times. How have the challenges economically here in the diocese affected the church? And not just in the diocese itself, but throughout the entire region, if you will.
Sure. Well, the church is not immune to the financial challenges that everybody in our state and many places in our nation are facing. The church is not exempt from that at all. So we've had people turning to us for assistance in greater numbers through our Catholic Charities offices throughout the state. And some of our parishes and schools are struggling in the midst of the financial challenges, but people have done their very best to be supportive, to be generous, and we're so grateful for that. The diocese itself is doing okay on a day-to-day, a year-to-year basis. We're at a break-even budget. We're paying our bills. We're continuing our programs, but we don't have lots of extra money. In the long-term perspective, we have some financial challenges we have to work hard to meet. We're carrying an outstanding debt. We have concerns about the funding of our priest pension fund, the retirement fund, trying to provide support for our schools, which you know are challenged. Some of our parishes are struggling in terms of paying their bills and keeping their doors open. So the diocese itself, on a daily basis, we're doing okay, but we don't have extra resources. And a lot of our parishes are working real hard to try to prosper and survive.
Talking about the pensions for priests, how about if we take a look at the 30 to 40 years on the front end as well? One of the goals this year of the church worldwide, not just here in the diocese, was to try and create more of an excitement around the idea of becoming a priest and getting the calling out there. How has the diocese done? I mean, have you seen an increase in numbers of those who have expressed an interest?
Yeah, the year for priests that Pope Benedict promulgated about a year ago is just coming to an end now. There's a big celebration in Rome, I believe, this weekend. And it's been an opportunity, first of all, to thank our priests for their service, to encourage them in their ministry, and for priests themselves to renew their commitment to the Lord and to the work. So we've had a number of different programs throughout the diocese trying to affirm our priests and to highlight their ministry and to encourage them to keep up their very, very good work. In terms of vocations, we're doing okay. Again, it's an area where we can always do more. We'd like to have more seminarians. We have about 20 young men studying for the seminary right now. We'll be ordaining 3 new priests for the diocese at the end of June, which is a great gift, a great blessing for us, and always a source of encouragement to have new guys coming into the ministry. So we could do more. We hope for better results in the future, but we're also very, very pleased with and very proud with the quality of the guys who are going through our seminary program. They're going to be terrific young priests and give us lots of reasons for encouragement and hope in the future.
Just a quick aside, in taking a look at an AP story that actually came out yesterday as we did this, there was a discussion about a confidant of Pope Benedict's, a colleague of yours, a bishop in Austria, who has been calling for an open discussion as to whether or not the role of celibacy in the priesthood should be changed. I mean, and this isn't some extremist. This is somebody who has the Pope's ear and a colleague of yours. Where do you stand on this?
Sure.
Is this something that should be discussed or perhaps even changed?
I always find it amusing, find it a little bit ironic when somebody says we should be talking about celibacy. We've been talking about celibacy almost every week, every day for the last 40 years. So it's a discussion that hasn't gone away. I think the discipline of the Church is very clear that celibacy is a gift and it's a call. Not everyone is able to accept it, but it is a requirement for those serving as priests in the Western Church and the Roman Church. And one has great practical benefits and great spiritual benefits as well. So should we continue the conversation about celibacy? Of course, but not so much to change it. I think to understand it more and to encourage it. It is a real gift to the Lord and a gift to the Church when men are able to accept that call and that gift for celibacy. But it's been a constant discussion. Nothing really new about that right now, I don't think.
One of the real challenges that the Catholic Church is facing, and has been over the past decade or 2 decades, obviously, has been the abuse and the challenges that we face there. Obviously, something that started in the Fall River Diocese right over the border and continues right now. Pope Benedict actually a number of weeks ago stepped up and said that this is something that really we need to take a look at and focus on. This is an issue that is coming from within the Church as well as from without. A colleague of yours, Cardinal O'Malley, of course, from Boston, is going to be taking a look at what's going on in Dublin and in Ireland. Where do we stand right now? And has the Catholic Church here in Rhode Island suffered as a result of what has happened and the Church's reaction to this?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say, whenever we talk about the sexual abuse crisis and the headlines that accompany that, first thing we need to do is to remember the suffering of those who have been victimized, the victims of sexual abuse and their families. That's always the starting point. We can never lose sight of the terrible trauma that's been visited upon them and how they have suffered from that. So we need to think about them and encourage them and pray for them. At the same time, as the Church responds to this, a couple points need to be made. The Church has worked very, very hard now to do everything possible to provide a safe environment for our children and young people, to train our priests and our lay ministers and anyone who works with young people. There's not an institution in the world that's worked harder than the Catholic Church in recent years to deal with the issue of sexual abuse. Another thing to keep in mind, it's not just a church problem for the Catholic Church, and it gets involved in other churches and other organizations that are also in the headlines on occasion, the Little Leagues and Boy Scouts and wrestling teams and swimming teams and public schools. Sexual abuse is a real serious concern for our whole society. And even though the Church often gets dragged into the spotlight for a lot of reasons, it's a societal problem. Until we learn to take that seriously, the problem will not go away. The last thing to keep in mind is when we talk about sexual abuse in the Church, most of these incidents took place 30 and 40 and even 50 years ago. That's really when the abuse was taking place, when the crisis occurred. We're in a cleanup mode now, and I think we're doing very well, and we will continue to do our very best until we can completely control this terrible situation.
No, and I understand that, and I appreciate you coming and speaking candidly. One of the things I enjoy the most is that it's no holds barred when we invite you here to News on the Record whenever I speak to you.
Sure.
But I have to call you on this, and that, when you talk about Boy Scouts or Little League or some of these other secular groups and organizations that are going on, they, of course, have to abide by the rules and the regulations and the civic authorities. One of the criticisms of the Church, however, is that you have not done so. Do you think that has changed, and do you think that's warranted?
No, I don't think it's That's completely accurate, because in fact there are priests in jail because of sexual abuse. They've been subject to criminal penalties, and we know the church has been completely subject to civil penalties as well. We are paying an enormous price for our sins, and as perhaps we should. It's a time of purification. So somehow the perception the church has gotten off scot-free on this, or the priests have gotten off scot-free, not true. Priests have been imprisoned. The church has paid an enormous price in civil penalties. So there has been a lot of accountability. Can we do more? Probably. And should all of society be held to the same standards and the same publicity that the Catholic Church is being held to? Yeah, I think that's accurate too. So there are some misperceptions about this whole issue. But we need to talk about it. We need to address it head on, and we're not afraid to do that.
Good. Now, has it affected the church as well in any different way, from perhaps heading on out there and getting an increase in vocation to raising funds? And I mean, it's quite a challenge, obviously.
Sure, it is a challenge, and I'm sure it has affected the church in some ways financially. The debt that I mentioned before, that's a result of sexual abuse settlements. I suppose it's certainly affected the reputation of the church in terms of being a moral voice. I know every time I speak out on any issue, whether it's abortion or gay marriage or immigration, one of the pushbacks I get is, you shouldn't be talking about these things because of sexual abuse in the church. Until you clean up your own house, you shouldn't be talking about those things. Well, we can do both. We can clean up our own house, but we certainly won't be silenced when it comes to the church being a moral voice in our community.
Bishop Tobin is joining us on this edition of ABC6 News on the Record on this Sunday morning, celebrating, I guess, the 5th year in your stewardship here of the church in the Diocese of Rhode Island. Quite an interesting change from your time in Ohio.
Sure. Well, 5 years gone, but 5 years and many, many more to come, God willing.
Very good. We'll be back in just a moment. One of the other controversies that you faced, obviously, this year as well, was a discussion with perhaps one of the most well-known Catholic politicians in the area, of course, Congressman Patrick Kennedy. We'll hear more about that in just a second. More good news, of course, from the church and the diocese here in Rhode Island, as ABC6 News on the Record continues in just a moment.
Springtime is in full swing for men at Spardello's. The unique colors and styles are in stock. Let the professional coordinators at Spardello's assist you in your individual sizing. Spardello's is open 7 days a week with suits starting at $199. Come experience the Spardello's difference. Middle Spring Avenue, North Providence.
On the East Bay, people have a choice that other Rhode Islanders don't. Full Channel, a local family-owned cable and internet provider, offering the latest in communication technology, powered by green resources, all at lower prices than our competitors. Call or log on today for more details. You'll see why Full Channel is the natural choice. Full Channel, the digital lifeline for the East Bay.
You have to be honest.
Play fair. In this game, you have to be everywhere.
And that's how we play the game.
Working hard every day.
Going the distance to bring you local news.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ABC6 News. Honest, fair, everywhere.
That's how we play the game.
On ABC6.
I'm Steve Dorr, General Manager of ABC6, News Channel 5, and ABC6.com. And I'm back with reason number 3 for you to try ABC6 News this week. It's very simple. We have the best people in town. This is where it happens, where the hardworking ABC6 News team puts it all together. From breaking news and weather to award-winning investigations to stories that focus on the people making a difference in our community. It all starts right here in the newsroom. If you haven't tried ABC6 News yet, check it out. After you do, send me an email. I read every one of them. Tell me what you like and what you think we could be doing better.
Suits rock at Spardello's. Spardello's is all the sizes from 1 boys through 70 portly long. Spardello's is rocking with suits starting at $199. Always free alterations. Open 7 days a week. Come experience the Spardello's difference. Middle Spring Avenue, North Providence.
Welcome back to ABC6 News on the Record. I'm Andrew Gobile, sitting in for John DeLuca. John and Buddy Cienci getting a well-deserved day off as we take a look and help celebrate the 5th anniversary of the announcement that Bishop Thomas Tobin became the bishop here in Providence for the entire diocese. Again, this video from 5 years ago at the celebratory Mass where he went in at St. Peter's and Paul Cathedral here in Providence, which absolutely is a beautiful cathedral and has been around for quite some time. So again, we thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate the opportunity again.
And I have said a number of times, I love having you on, especially in this format, because it gives us a little bit more time to delve deeply into the issues. It's not a 90-second piece where we get there and we talk about what's going on and then you're cut off.
And some of these issues are very complex and they defy simple answers or simple responses, so I do appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, so let's get right into it then.
Sure.
One of the other issues and one of the controversies that we saw this year was a controversy surrounding Congressman Patrick Kennedy, who stepped up in the midst of the health care debate and criticized the Catholic Church for stepping up and saying that they should not have taken the stand that you did. You should not have taken the stand you did, going against then Senator Kennedy, what he was calling for. And there arose from this quite a bit of a contretemps, if you will. Tell me a little bit about your feelings about what was happening. Obviously, Congressman Kennedy is not going to be running again. Are you at all concerned with what happened as a result of this? Or, I mean...
Well, it was certainly a very interesting time for me personally, a very interesting time in my life, something I never really could have predicted or expected would have happened. But it was an interesting discussion, and let me emphasize again, as I tried to say at that time, this was not a personal attack or a personal fight between myself and the congressman. I think we were dealing with some very difficult issues. You know, when you have a Kennedy, a Catholic bishop, you have health care, you have abortion, you have Holy Communion. That created a perfect storm of a very discussable, very debatable set of questions. So
we enjoyed covering it.
I'm sure you did, and lots of other people did too, even nationally and sometimes internationally. So it was the issues themselves, I think, became really important. I have no ill regard for Congressman Kennedy. I wish him all the best in the world, and I hope he'll do well after he retires from Congress. But these issues themselves are very important. We talk about respect for life or health care or what it means to be a Catholic. They continue to be very important questions for us to discuss now and in the days and years to come, well beyond myself and well beyond Congressman Kennedy.
What are the issues that came up as a result of this? And it happened to go back 4 years ago when Senator Kerry was running for office as well, a Catholic who was expressed support for pro-choice decisions. And I'd like to ask you, if you would, I mean, do you support the idea of politicians who support pro-choice planks should not receive communion?
Sure. And that's a question, of course, we've been over many, many times, and it's also very highly nuanced and very complex. The basic point is this, that no one has an absolute right to receive Holy Communion. There are requirements, there are dispositions that have to be in place. A person has to be spiritually prepared to receive Holy Communion, as we often say, in the state of grace, and they have to be in structural unity with the church. They have to be a member of the church, because communion signifies not just union with the Lord, but also communion with the body of the church, with the institution. So those conditions have to be present, and anybody who finds themselves not spiritually prepared to receive Holy Communion, or outside of the church, or someone, the bishops have said, who deliberately and consistently repudiates the essential teachings of the church on essential matters of faith and morals, should not be presenting themselves for Holy Communion. So that's where it begins. After that, I think there are lots of very personal judgment and conversations that have to take place. I have to say, I continue to be very disappointed in some of the current politicians, those running for office now who identify themselves as Catholics, especially some of those running for a governor right now, Mr. Caprio and Mr. Lynch, who identify themselves as Catholics, but still are competing with each other to see who can be most pro-abortion, who can be most pro-gay marriage. Really, I think, abandoning their faith, at least on these issues, for the sake of political office. And I think that's very, very disheartening and very discouraging. And I would hope that they and other Catholic politicians would be committed to their faith and proud of their faith and willing to stand up for what their faith teaches.
Well, if I could call you on this then, because there were a number of pro-choice lawmakers in Italy who received communion from Pope John Paul II, and at the risk of sounding impertinent, what gives you the right to say that Pope John Paul II's decision to give communion to these politicians was incorrect? Because that's ultimately what you're saying.
Sure. Well, not exactly, because, again, as I said previously, some of the individual judgments have to be very highly nuanced and very carefully approached. Some of the documents we use to talk about Catholic politicians come from the popes themselves and come from the Conference of Bishops. So this is not something I've made up locally. These positions are well founded on the teachings of the Church, the documents of the American bishops, and in fact statements from the Holy Father, recent popes, saying that you have to be prepared to receive Holy Communion. Now, what you do when a particular individual approaches the communion rail or the communion line to receive Holy Communion in a given situation, lots of prudential, practical judgments have to be made there, but that does not mitigate the basic principles, the basic values that are in play here.
So if there were a mass and Attorney General Lynch or Treasurer Caprio were to go up and at the railing ask for communion, would you give it to them?
Oh, at this point, absolutely. First of all, they're still candidates. Neither one of them has been elected yet, and I don't know who will be elected. There's a big difference between someone who's a candidate and speaking about different positions, and then someone who's in an elected office and has the chance to do something about it. So, yeah, I have no reason at this point to ask either one of them to refrain from receiving Holy Communion. And again, let me emphasize, if we reach that point, that will be a personal and confidential discussion between me and any political leader for that matter, not just those two, but any political leader. That will be a personal and individual conversation.
Now, if we're speaking rhetorically, let's carry this a little bit further then. If one of them does get elected and they go and they have this discussion with you and they say, Bishop Tobin, I appreciate your interest and that's wonderful, but I am still going to support pro-choice legislation. I'm still going to support legislation that calls for equal rights for, homosexual couples, and I'm still going to go before you and expect to receive communion. What would you say then?
Well, I think, first of all, we'd have to have that very personal and individual conversation. Right now, that's a very hypothetical thing. Okay. So I don't know what the outcome of that conversation would be. But I would encourage them and anyone involved in Catholic life, not just politicians, by the way, but anyone in a position of leadership, to be committed to their faith, to be faithful to the teachings of Christ and the teachings of the Church, and not to sell their soul for the sake of their own advancement.
Wow. That's interesting as you use that term. As I can remember sitting in Mass the other day, my son's first communion, and a lot of these thoughts were going through my mind.
Absolutely. Again, they're not unique to me. These are constant teachings of the Church that, as the Scripture says, what good does it do for a man to gain the whole world and lose his salvation of his soul? And I need to think about that for myself. Everyone who's a committed Christian has to apply those principles to themselves, whether it be a politician, a corporate leader, someone in the media, an entertainer, an athlete. How do I live out my faith, the commitment to my Christian faith, without abandoning the principles that are so important for me?
Well, let's bring up athletics then. And we talk about it, and we have a lot of fun. Every time I talk to you, and, I dog you because you're a Steelers fan,
and
we say that the Pats are going to do very well this year, and we have a lot of fun with it. And you've gained a lot of traction, and people take a look at you as a human being and not just a bishop, because you are a huge Steelers fan. Ben Roethlisberger. He has been in the news over the past few months because of some past incidents. Where do we stand right now? And if you want to talk specifically about what's going on with Ben, that's fine. But what about the role of well-known athletes as far as those who are concerned with being moral leaders? I mean, do they share some responsibility in leading those who look up to them?
I think so.
And what about Ben specifically?
Sure. And you may recall that a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, I wrote an article for Rhode Island Catholic in my regular column about Tiger Woods and Ben Roethlisberger. And the point there was that, it's very disappointing when they misbehave like that, because they are in a public spotlight. Like it or not, they live on the public spotlight and the publicity and the media support they get, and they also struggle with that when they get off the mark. So we look at these public figures and say, that's really a shame, and why don't they behave themselves, and why do they get themselves in these situations? At the same time, as I emphasize in this article, we're all subject to that. We too have to behave properly, because even though we might not be, not everyone is in the public spotlight all the time, we have an accountability before the Lord for our behavior. So the same principles that apply to someone like Ben Roethlisberger or Tiger Woods or anyone else in the spotlight, a media person, politician.
Why are you looking at me? Come on.
Well, this includes all of us.
Yeah.
The same rules apply. Sometimes we're in a public spotlight. The fall is more noticeable.
Yes.
But we're all human beings. We all share these faults. We all have to work hard to do our best, to do what's right and good and pleasing in God's sight. And for the sake of our children, too, what kind of example do we give to young people when we misbehave as adults? They grow up in that culture of misbehavior, and that's a terrible example to give to children and young people.
How challenging is it right now in dealing with Ben Roethlisberger and Tiger Woods and all of these headlines, as you try to lead those younger members of the Catholic Church? And I mentioned a moment ago, First Communion for my younger son. When they take a look and we're trying to lead them down the right path, and there have been issues with the Catholic Church and issues with those in leadership and authority right now, how do we deal with that?
Well, again, one thing is to point out the fact that their behavior is wrong.
Yeah.
We should never tolerate bad behavior. Also, we should try to lift up good role models. People in our community, people in our country, people in our world who are behaving properly and, leading good moral lives and trying to do what's right, trying to help other people, people who are generous with their time and their talent and their resources. There are lots of tremendously good role models out there, too, that we should be focusing on and pointing to. But I think we, as certainly myself as a religious leader and other people as parents, as spouses, have a very important role to play in setting a good example of what it means to be a person of faith, what it means to be a Christian or any faith community. Are you being faithful to the commitments you've made in your church, your synagogue, your temple, to your marriage, to your family? That example is really important in our society and our culture right now.
You are the head of the church here in Rhode Island. As we wrap things up in a limited amount of time, I'd like to ask kind of a pretty basic question. Are you happy with where the church is here in Rhode Island today?
Sure. I'm very happy with where the church is. On one hand, as I said at a meeting recently, I think it's a great time to be a Catholic. I think it's a great and exciting time to be a Catholic in the Diocese of Providence in Rhode Island. Now, having said that, there's always more work to do. We can't become complacent, rest on our laurels. There's more work to do in terms of learning about the faith, of challenging people to live their faith, of being involved in the life of the community, trying to share our faith with others, trying to help those who are in need. That work never ends. It started with the work of Christ 2,000 years ago. As long as the church is on earth, it will be our work and our mission. So, yeah, we're doing well, doing some great things, but lots to do yet.
What is your most pressing challenge here in Rhode Island?
Well, two things. First of all, I think for Catholics to keep them involved in the life of the church. That's why we're doing this very high-profile evangelization program. That's going very well, by the way, trying to bring people back to the church, invite others to become Catholic. And secondly, trying to get Catholics to live up to their faith and to live according to their principles, to say if you claim to be a Catholic, it means something for you. You cannot have it both ways. So internally, the sacramental life of the church is really important, but also our influence and our involvement in the life of the world is really important too.
So are we going to see you here 5 years from now? News on the record 10 years from now?
I certainly think so. As long as the Lord and as long as the Pope wants me to be here, I will be here doing my best.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting, and I'd like to pursue this in the future as well. I mean, there is some degree of politics involved in everything, especially when you achieve the level that you have right now. I mean, and this is a great plum position, if you will. I mean, I hate to sound so crass in saying that, but I mean, is there hope that perhaps you could move on to a larger city or a larger diocese? Or?
Well, my hope is that I will stay here. That's my hope and my prayer. Obviously, I will always do my best to do whatever the church wants me to do, but I have no indication or no desire to go anywhere else. I'm extraordinarily happy in Rhode Island. People have been so good. We have a lot of work to do, and I hope and pray that the Pope and the Lord will leave me here until I retire or die, or whichever comes first.
All right. Well, we appreciate this. So 5 years from now, we'll see you on the 10th anniversary.
And hopefully, many other occasions too.
We'll see you before then as well. Bishop, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for joining us on this edition of ABC6 News on the Record. I'm Andrew Gobiel again for John and for Buddy. Enjoy your day off and enjoy your Sunday afternoon. Thanks.
Springtime is in full swing for men at Spardello's. The unique colors and styles